Check, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Καλώς ήρθατε όσοι ήρθατε τώρα. Όσοι είστε εδώ από πιο πριν, ξέρετε ότι είμαστε στο event, στην εκδήλωση που ονομάζεται Enter Afrofuturism. Στέγη Ιδρύματος Ωνάση, Detached και Drogatech, να δώσουμε χαιρετισμούς στα παιδιά. Εγώ λέγομαι Κωστής, εκπροσωπώ της Black Athena. Από αυτό το σημείο και μετά η όλη συνέντευξη και συζήτηση γίνεται στα αγγλικά, όπως και προηγουμένως, στις προηγούμενες διαλέξεις και συζητήσεις. So, this isn't about me, so I'd just like to welcome the legendary a Guy Called Gerald to Athens. Please give it up for Guy Called Gerald.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, yeah, we'll keep this brief. Got a lot of stuff to get through.
So for anyone, first of all, welcome to Athens, and for anyone that might not be aware of who a Guy Called Gerald is, in a nutshell, how would you?
Okay, so I wouldn't be embarrassed about it because, like, I used to call myself like England's dirty little secret because, like, basically when the whole kind of acid house thing started or rave thing started back in like 1988 or just before that 87, like I was already like listening to what was going on in like Detroit and Chicago and like doing interviews and saying, yeah, you've got to listen to Derek May, check out these guys from like Chicago, like Chippy and Adonis and like Marshall Jefferson and all this stuff. I mean, there was one or two things that was coming over to England at the time, but it wasn't like a mainstream kind of thing, you know, and we were pretty underground anyway, like the whole time, and I still am, by the way. I'm totally underground. I've never sold out in 30 years. Well, next year's 30 years for me. I just want you to know that. Always like to the core and like looking for new stuff to give to the youth. Anyway, so like basically I started about that time in 1988, and I would call myself like a bridgeway between like what was going on in England at the time in the kind of late 80s and what became like rave music in the early 90s. Basically that was it.
Cool. But let me take you back. Before we go to 88 and before we go to the acid house thing, let's go back to the early 80s and when you're growing up in Manchester and all your early influences, early musical influences, and things going around. Could you going on around you? I mean, could you describe the scene at the time a little bit and the sounds?
Well, it was a mixed bag. We didn't actually recognize things as like genres. Like apart from there was funk heads and soul heads, you know what I mean, and then there was like reggae, you know, or dub heads. So like maybe it was just like funk heads and dub heads basically, and basically if you was into like dub and stuff like that, you was part of like a sound system or you would follow a sound system, and the funk and soul kind of crews would like be more like dancers and stuff like that, and it would be more of a weekend thing, and they would go like dancing on a weekend. You would have your like kind of like a camera bag with your talcum powder, and like you'd have on like really tight like jeans, sometimes bleached, frayed at the bottom, with a pair of spats, and you would do like funky kind of moves and stuff to like funk music, and which later on became electro funk, and also there was like jazz involved in that. I'm trying to go through it really fast. Kind of started around about 1982, or no, actually no, 1980, I would say, like when the whole kind of like jazz funk kind of thing and the funk thing kind of started to emerge, and I started following that. But before that, I was listening to a lot of like reggae and soul, lovers rock, stuff like this. Like my dad had loads of old reggae before he became like a Christian and stuff like that. So like that was a big influence in my life. But like yeah, the funk thing was like, well, I kind of discovered like dancing and stuff like that. So I started experimenting with like funk and soul dancing and stuff like that in them days, and started to branch out into other styles of dance. For me, like the early 80s dance was really important. I didn't actually know anything about music production or anything like that. It was just dance was the focus. There was music, or finding music was just like a means to an end, to just so that we could dance.
So you were a dancer. You mentioned jazz funk. You mentioned electro, and going from jazz funk, jazz dancing and jazz funk dancing into electro and break dancing, right?
Yeah, definitely. By 82, 83, we was like fully into break dancing. We was like basically the early hip hop culture was kind of coming over from America on the underground, basically. So we kind of accepted that because it was kind of something that we could like relate to at the time, because there was a load of football hooliganism and all sorts of other rubbish that we didn't go to pubs and things like that. So we kind of started our own thing, DJs and that kind of thing.
And you mentioned their reggae music and sound system culture, and you know, from what I understand, that was an influence on you. For anyone that is not aware of what a sound system is, or what it is made out of rather, could you tell us a little bit about it, and maybe?
Yeah, it's kind of hard in a way because it was always there, but if I kind of break it down, it was like if you could think of someone who would have a homemade entertainment system, but like they actually built it themselves, and then all the other neighbors would come round, or you would invite neighbors round. I mean, this is just like I'm simplifying it. Like, this is what, but like, if you can imagine that in the 70s, and if there was a birthday party or if there was a christening or something like that, people would come round, and then that got amplified and bigger until it became basically one sound system against another sound system. I mean, I guess that's, I mean, like, if you're born into it, it's like asking a fish to describe water, really. I think, it was, with a sound system, it is basically, I mean, probably without me even knowing, it was my first experience into electronic, music. I mean, the first time I'd seen someone building a speaker box, first time I'd seen someone with a soldering iron, they were building a valve amp, and I was intrigued by what was going on. But sound systems were basically, I mean, it was, I think every single estate in Manchester, where I grew up, they had their own sound system. The ones where we were called Yabiyu, and basically they would challenge other sound systems, and you would hear of them challenging sound systems from as far as Birmingham and stuff like that. You know, there was a sound system called Jungle Man, I think, from Birmingham. They used to keep axes in their boxes, you know what I mean? They were like bad boys. But anyway, going to that was back in the 70s, I think, late 70s. And, but back then, the music was really simple. DJing was one turntable on top of a really thick sponge to stop it from feeding back. We used to call it the dub sponge. Speakers were in categories. You had a wardrobe, which was just a wardrobe, and and you had a double jai, which was basically two wardrobes. And basically these would be stacked on top of each other, and then at the top of that you would have a chipper, right? And obviously that was the treble, and then you would have them on a wall on this side of the room, and then the other sound system would have theirs on the other side of the room. You could probably find some of this on YouTube, actually. And basically one sound system would start, and then they would basically play versions of tracks that they had, or if they were really clever, they would have cut a plate where on one side of on the left side, they would have the music, and on the right side, they would have the vocal. And they could put both of these things through a mixer, And then on the left side, I have like an echo chamber, so they could do their own mix down live of that track. And like, you know, seeing things like this when I was younger made me actually think of music in a way that you could perform it live. It wasn't just like playing like No Woman, No Cry, like or playing it on a cassette or something, but like you could actually, you're in a dance, someone's like saying, the MC is saying wheel up, and you wheel the track back. But instead of starting it again from the same place, you could start it with just the vocal and echo it out, and then come in with like a bass and you could go. I mean, like listening to like scientists and people like this actually made me think that you could actually mix this stuff down and make your own version. And like that was the kind of the money card and all, having your own version of something or being different. You know, and that kind of rolled over into like styles of dancing, and then later for me into production and stuff like that. You always wanted to be different from everybody else, not wearing the same shoes, the same clothes, or even talking the same sometimes. Your own little crew had their own slang or whatever. I mean, like today, cut and paste is like, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, basically to get to when you talk about UK music and all the way to today, and from the pirate radio days, sound system culture is like everyone sort of name checks sound systems and that kind of vibe. What do you think that's so important for UK music all the way to today?
Well, it still is like a big part of what became. I mean, like people, it was totally ingrained into the culture. As with like, I mean, there used to be a lot of Jamaicans in England. I mean, like a lot of them have died out. Some of them went home. Some of them like are probably just banned from coming back into the country or whatever. But I mean, it was like a really strong culture, and it's so strong that like I'll get on a bus now and there'll be like a public school, like a little white kid, and he's got his tie on it, and he's like, "Here, what? Get me?" You know what I mean? And you're like, "Huh?" That's like kind of like a slight Jamaican. It's a Jamaican slang that a lot of the young kids have developed into speaking now as part of the normal way they communicate with each other. In England, this happens like that's actually come from, when you think about it, from the 70s, from like sound system days or whatever. I mean, this is something that is ingrained now into like a generation that is being like the next generation in the UK. So that somehow we'll have to see what that turns into. Anyway.
And when I was actually noting down this question, something that sort of came to my mind about the sound, when I was going to ask you about sound systems, I kind of tried to imagine what it's like to be in a dance like that. And I always got the feeling with, DJs, Abba Shanti, people like that, scientists you mentioned, and it sort of brings a feeling where that something really technological, especially what sound system was in terms of technology in the early 80s, like such a huge shock and awe kind of system, which seemed very science fiction in a way, sort of juxtaposed to something supernatural, kind of, and these two things working together are sort of, kind of, I don't know, the word that came to my mind was magic. Do you agree at all with this, or?
Yeah, there is a kind of magic. I think for me the thing, and it's still about today, but it's really hard to find, is when someone has a culture or they have a movement and it doesn't involve like finance. When you've got nothing to lose, then magic comes out. I guarantee you. Like if you gave someone like some music to do, and they were like, oh wow, I've got to look at this person as the role model of the goal to get to. If they had no goal, if they were just left, and that's what happened with like a lot of like sound systems and stuff like that. You've got your community to impress, or like there's no basically what I'm trying to say. There's nothing to lose, so you you've got a free reign of where you would go, and your imagination is what creates the magic, basically. And that's what happens with early sound systems.
And, you know, you mentioned before about the late 80s period where obviously you've go through all these cultures, you're a dancer in those different styles, you start DJing and, you know, and then you eventually start producing, and you sort of have some big hits, like by the late 80s, you know, obviously with really huge tunes, Voodoo Ray, one of these tunes. Just wanted to ask you at the time, obviously you mentioned listening to people like Derek May and the rest of the Belleville Three, and you know, obviously people from Chicago like Larry Heard were sort of operating at the time. Do you think one of the reasons you had such a profound effect, or you guys, and obviously other UK producers at the time as well, was that the fact that you were sort of operating at a frontier of like new music technologies? Do you think that had anything to do with how important you guys were at that time?
I mean, I was following them. I mean, like, I would just like to say their names because, I mean, like, there was Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson were the first three that I'd kind of listened to, and then like later on, like Carl Craig and these, you know, they came into it, like Blake Baxter and the rest. But like, I actually was following what they were doing. I was listening to what they were doing. I was lucky at the time that I had built my own little studio with the same kind of equipment that you could use at home. At the time, it was really cheap to get hold of. Nobody wanted that kind of machines, so they were kind of throwaway. So it was easy to get hold of them, and also at the same time, there was only the underground type people who were interested in that type of music. So the value wasn't that, you know, there wasn't that big a value for other people. And yeah, I basically, for me, it was a communication thing. Maybe it goes back. I mean, I don't want to get all spiritual about it, but like when I listen to things like Feel Surreal or like The Sound, or, you know, like some of these tracks that they were putting out, I mean, I would feel like something like grabbing me, something like a connection, like how, like, you know, when my mom was in church or something, like when she would feel the spirit, it was like that, you know what I mean? Like, I would, this stuff would grab me, and like, luckily, I had like these cheap like machines, so I could like kind of go out and, or not even go out, just like do, I mean, like most of it I was doing in like my bedroom. I mean, say like Voodoo Ray, like the bass sound, I did it on a synth, but I was trying to recreate the bass sound alone. I was trying to recreate the sound by Kevin Saunderson, like the actual hollow bass sound. That's what I wanted to create with this machine. I don't know what machine he used, but like, you know, it was like basically that talked to me, I was talking back, you know. At the time, there was just like a few people that would come round like my mom's attic where my little studio was, and like we was just a little crew that were interested in like that music that was like an offshoot in a way of like electro funk. So it was like an offshoot of an underground type of music that was happening. So, you know, there was no looking for hits or whatever, you know what I mean? Like the fact that we could actually put a record out was like more than enough, you know. That was more than enough of a reward, and still is today, to tell you the truth.
You mentioned Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson. Do you remember when was the first time you heard music by them? And do you remember, was it a record shop?
It was on the radio. I think, if I remember rightly, the first thing I'd heard was by Juan Atkins, and it was a track called Clear. He was in a group called Cybertron, and they were playing like some other like electro funk, probably like Hal Nafish and like I don't know, some African Bambaataa and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden they mixed in this track, Clear. And it was just like, it was almost like someone had poured water into the radio and like washed away everything else. Because he just did there was like this arpeggio that was happening, but with a delay on it, you know, which just created like this kind of ripple effect. And the sound was just, it wasn't electro funk, it was techno. You know, it just, yeah, I'm just getting shivers like thinking about it now. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so at the time, I mean, obviously you mentioned, we mentioned different machines, different equipment. You know, at the time, and you know, obviously now a lot of talk, you know, in the media, and you know, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, AI. And I'm not going to ask you if there's going to be robot DJs or robot producers.
They're all robots.
But what I am wondering is, at that time, with that equipment that you mentioned that people didn't really want, and therefore you got to buy some of it cheaply, how much of the artistic outcome was actually based on the actual equipment that you had?
Interesting question. Like, what I found out really early on was you could actually sound like the machine or like yourself, you know, and like it was at a time when people were saying, oh, these drum machines are just like blips and squeaks, and, you know, and I kind of wanted to prove them wrong, you know, so I wanted there to be something else to, so, I mean, I used to have this stuff in my bedroom, so I'd wake up to it and go to sleep to it, and it was like I could make like a pattern on the sequencer and just press play and just get it to do, just to regurgitate, you know, at its own pace what was going on, or I could figure out how could I get like a bit of space in between the bass, like on a funk track, you know, like, so I went down that route because it was a bit harder in a way, but like it was, for me, it was the best way. And then I listening to other things like, okay, like One Atkins, No UFOs, right? The bass line, dun 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 dun, right? It was just, I mean, it was simple, but like then it was made into different, you know, with different sounds going through it, and then there was a vocal over the top. But you can't just get a machine to do that, you know. And people, I don't know, people kind of, they start feeling that in a way. I mean, like, it's not the same as just having an arpeggio going, you know what I mean? It's like it's actually something that's thought out. You actually feel it. I mean, if you were dancing, you didn't just want something that was just going to be like monotonous. You would just like fall asleep. You needed bits of space in between what was happening, or you needed like some adventure, you know. So, you know, you needed the music to be adventurous, basically. So there is a kind of like this difference, and like nowadays, I mean, I must say there is this tendency for people to just, because they just want to beat match. So they don't give too much kind of thought to melody or to rhythm. You know, they basically just, okay, there's a noise, let's just put that on there and then put a sound effect over the top. You know, and that's become over the last, I'd say, over the last 20 years, that has become like the thing. You know, so like dance music isn't sexy anymore. You know, like it used to be, like, you know, it was like you would go to somewhere and it was a mixed crowd of males and females, and, you know, and I've seen the same thing happen in jungle too, where, you know, it started off really kind of, you know, where people were sampling breaks and stuff like that, and there was nothing to lose, and then it got to a stage where it was just like this one-tone drum machine, and like, you know, and the same thing happened, you know, like there was the ratio of male to female kind of separated and disappeared, and like, you know, when it was jungle, you know, like say like Jungle Fever or Champagne Splash, or like, you know, if you went down to Orange or, you know, Angel, there was all these, like in the early days, like just post rave, there was all these nice little kind of places you could go and just shock out. Shocking out just meant like bobbling and dancing, and, you know, it went from that to like, you know, some kid with his baseball cap halfway down his, you know, like this, like listening to just wondering what type of amen it was. It just got really technical, you know what I mean? It went from being something where you didn't really care about what the music, the process of the music. You just wanted, like, to dance, you know what I mean? And, like, basically the people in the early days, they weren't really that technical either. They would just throw breaks in, and it was like, okay, I'll put in an old B line and, like, you know, and, like, maybe a melody that someone might remember from one of their moms or their sister's old tunes or something like that. And that was jungle. And then, and that thing has happened many, many times after, in Speed Garage, I think, and in all these things. Starts off, like, really, like, where it's something that you probably made in, like, you know, your bedroom, and then it's got to a stage where, you know, there's big production, and it just gets thinned out in a way, you know, everything gets really too thought out, and, you know, if there was one big hit, everyone goes in that direction.
Formulaic, maybe.
That's the word.
And also to connect it to a previous speaker before, I guess what you were describing as, you know, originally jungle and originally house before it turned into the repetitive thing that you're describing, is so we kind of had the concept of bashment that was mentioned before. I think it works like that.
Sure.
So, but you know, you went into jungle, and I mean I think that's amazing. The fact that, you know, we start from jazz funk and we go through all these genres, and then the next point in your sort of history is you start making jungle. You sort of stop being in acid house and 808 state, and you move into jungle. And I'd like to ask you this transition is not very clear in my mind in terms of the scene, because there was other jungle people who started playing jungle or UK hardcore, or you know, who were also playing house and techno before, because obviously, you know, jungle didn't exist.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I think everyone had their own story. For me, because I had actually signed to a major record label. I had an imprint called Subscape on their label, and they said I could do what I wanted to do, whatever I wanted. So I had my own studio at home, so I made an entire album, which was kind of marketable because it had the vocals, and I kind of kept away from, like, full-on street music kind of thing, so that, you know, they could market it in their way. And they didn't call me back or anything. They just, you know, it was like, you know, I went to get my master tapes, and they phoned my management and said that I went in and wrecked their office, which didn't happen. You know, I'm not that kind of person. And that's the last I heard of them, you know. So I was like, well, fair enough. I've got this studio. I don't have to do what other people want me to do anymore. So I'm going to just basically go freestyle. So I started this label called Juicebox, and started to make, and we had a sound system and all with me and MC Tunes, just like a local sound system for playing music in our neighborhood kind of thing, called Juicebox 2. And basically I just started to do these more like breakbeat things, breakbeat tracks, with like kind of reggae B lines and stuff like that. And it was working, so we started pressing them up. And just had this little thing in Manchester. There was some things going on in London at the time, but I wasn't too sure what was going on down there. Because there was pirate radio stations that was playing this kind of music, and everything was really regional. So we didn't get so much about what was going on down in London. But I got a call one day off this guy called Goldie, who told me to come down to London and check out what was going on down there. And it blew my mind. I didn't realize it was actually really big down there, whereas in Manchester it was just like a little crew of us that was doing it. So that's kind of how I started to get into it. I was doing it as kind of in a way it was like a retaliation. Originally it was a retaliation to this major record label, and it was a relief because when I was working with them, I had to be careful of what kind of things I was sampling and because I didn't want them to get in trouble. Whereas doing something that was totally underground, I was just ripping stuff from everywhere, you name it. I was doing things like taking a Michael Jackson and a Prince thing and putting them together, but then the skill was to try and mash them up so no one would ever know what that was. You know what I mean? That was kind of part of the challenge. And then also the other challenge was trying to make the next track that you put out as meatier than the one before. So it was like beeline challenge, and I would challenge myself. So like 28 Gun Bad Boy came out, like the other track that came out after that was called Anything Can Happen, and Anything Can Happen had to be like a meatier beeline than the first one, you know what I mean? So I was always going for like a heavier kind of beeline, which is, you know, part of my culture.
Amazing. I mean, that label is absolutely incredible. Whoever hasn't checked out Juice Box, I highly recommend they should if you're interested in jungle music.
Yeah, I mean, like luckily you can. I mean, all this stuff is. I think it's accessible online, whereas back then I think we pressed up like say like 500, and then we'd move on to the next one, and then you know what I mean, so on. But yeah, if you can get hold of original cuts, they would kind of worth lots of money, I think, now, because there's only a few of them around.
Yeah. And you mentioned the phone call you got from this guy called Goldie, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because you put out a record called Black Secret Technology in '95, and it's kind of funny because I think it was February '95 that you put that record out, and then Goldie's Timeless came out in I think September of the same year. So your record actually predates Timeless, which is very interesting. I guess that's why sort of a lot of people, you know, really consider it like one of the best sort of jungle albums, I suppose. How did that record come about, and also what is the Black Secret Technology?
Well, I can't tell you what Black Secret Technology is, but okay, thank you. Yeah, it wouldn't be like basically okay. So you know, like there was the first man. I could go all the way back, and like there was like a hole in the floor, and a man put a skin over it, and like you know that was the first drum. You know what I mean? And from that, they went into talking about drums, and then like from that, like a man was made into. He was taken away from his own land and brought to another land, and like at some point it was made illegal for him to bang that drum. Like he was actually, there was a cause of death. If he was going to play that drum, like you know he was going to die. But that is, you know, people still ran off into the mountains in Jamaica and places like that, and they had their own kind of different styles of like banging a kumina drum, and like one of the styles is called Naya Bingi, which is like a really kind of Ital Rasta rhythm style thing to play. I kind of fell in love with that because of the simplicity of it. Right? I'm not a Rasta, I wish I was, but like, you know what I mean? I grew up in a Christian kind of background back then, but I managed to abolish that, right, anyway. But yeah, so like the Black Secret Technology was basically kind of like meshed into that, using like technology, but how do I say it? It's using technology in a way that it traces back to your origins. I was searching, basically. If you read the back of the cover of Black Secret Technology, you'll find that I'm searching for like basically the connection between me and these people that built their first like drum, which was like kind of the first. It was like a technology in a way but like somewhere along the way we got cut, you know. And like if there was a man, I mean, like one of the things that got me thinking, if there was a man that would say you can't do that because I'll kill you, there must have been a reason for that, you know what I mean? There was something that happened. He couldn't have been that stupid that you would just stop a man from just banging. There was something that happened at that time that made it like he cannot do this because it is like either a threat to his survival or I don't know what. But anyway, like, so I was on a search to find out what this thing, I still am, like, I wanted to know, I wanted to know the power of this drum in a way, and like the technology kind of could make that easier because I know that part of the thing with this drumming is a trance kind of thing. I mean, like I've seen people like, you know, go into like, I mean, in churches You know, like they disguise this. You know, they use like the Christianity as a kind of, or they used to, like some of the older people, they use this Christianity as a way of protecting like something. I don't know what it is. There's something else. Like they use and they protect it with like this. Well, they don't protect it, but like they covered it over with like this Christian thing, right? I'm not got anything against Christians, but like, and the same thing with like, so it was something that's old and like really kind of powerful, but you know it was so it had to be guarded by keeping it down, and like, or else you would like die or whatever. So you know there's a whole kind of, I can't explain it, but there's a whole thing is shrouded in all sorts of other things. You know what I mean? If you see someone like, if you see like a Naya Bingi thing happening, and like you see people like trance out, like their eyes roll back, they go off into, they go somewhere else. You know what I mean? And like I kind of wanted to do that with music at the time with jungle. You know what I mean? When we started to dance the jungle, I mean, like in the early days, like, it was like people shocking out. Like before it became like really like this, there was definitely something about it, the syncopation of it, that made something happen. Anyway, I'm rolling
the
on
energy.
Here. Sorry.
No, perfect. So yeah, Black Secret Technology. I just want to read out a few titles of song titles that are written here: The Nile, The Reno, Cyber Jazz, Voodoo, Rage, and also there's samples in there from science fiction films. Discogs informs me. June, Tingler from 1959, Robocop sampled in there. So to me, there's a very clear sort of pattern of black music and science fiction.
Sci-fi, yeah. It's totally. I mean, like, I basically just. I mean, I grew up on like a sci-fi kind of escapism in a way of like, you know, like there was a sci-fi movie out. Like, I mean, Dune. I could watch it like over and over and over and over again. So there was parts of it that kind of just became part of what I would, you know, just my vocabulary. And like people that were around me at the time, you know what I mean? We would like fold time and stuff. Like, you know, we were gonna do something. We say, yeah, we did that really fast. You folded time, you know, and stuff like that. But anyway, like so, that was ingrained in what I was doing at the time, and it kind of just became a part of like different tracks. I mean, like something like Nile. The Nile though was. Kind of like it was a club in Manchester on the front line. It was like and Reno was a club underneath it. So like I was just paying homage to these places because they got there was these riots and these places got burnt down, and like basically they were the best places for black people in Manchester to go.
What kind of era and what kind of music?
I grew up in the 70s, and I used to walk past there all the time. There was always this old Rasta man outside, and like by the kind of like early 80s, mid 80s, I was going to the Reno, which was the kind of funk and soul type place. You could go down there and play dominoes, and it was full of dreadlocks, hippies, students, like you name it. You could go down there. The Nile was more of a big man's. It was like the old man's club, where you know, like we didn't really go into there. That was kind of that was full on like reggae kind of sticks man kind of style that in that place upstairs. But like, so I mean, it was just basically I was putting this album out, and I wanted to pay homage to these places. So I made 2 tracks for these places because it was like it was a central part of me for music. It was a central part of my music kind of background in Manchester, not the Hacienda.
Okay, so you mentioned the Hacienda. How come not the Hacienda? I mean, everyone talks about how influential it was, and obviously your music was
Hacienda,
featured.
yeah, the Hacienda was like kind of like post kind of what was going on. I mean, like in Manchester, we had like place make sevens. I think there was Legends. There was it Rafters? I can't remember. There was loads of clubs all over. I mean, like you could go out. Like I would when I was like 13 and 14. Like I would go out Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Every night of the week, I would go out to a club and like shock out and dance and still get up and go to school the next day or whatever. Yeah, like Hacienda was like a little bit later on, and it was pretty important because it was a new type of club. It was like the start of this warehouse type thing. I think they got the idea from America, where they went over to New York and seen like this big club kind of thing. But I mean, it was impressive for me. The thing that was impressive was the first time I went to somewhere where it was a club, and instead of having like the kind of like Saturday Night Fever style kind of decor, they had like like a screen with like video scratching on it. So they'd have cartoons and old black and white movies, and they would kind of like move them to the music. Instead of just having a lighting guy, they had a VJ basically, and like all this was new for me, and like the size of the place. So it was different in that way, but like the music at the time was like techno and acid house, and somehow I don't know, like they managed to ingrain kind of like indie music into it. I mean, like for me, that was confusing for me to tell you the truth, because it's like in spiral carpets and stuff like that. Not that it's a bad thing, you know what I mean? It was pretty groovy as far as rock music goes, but like for me, I couldn't find the connection with like the dance thing, But like they, it was part of the. So like that's why I would say. I mean, for me, it wasn't part of my background. Like my background was like strictly like dub, funk, jazz, and I didn't have anything to do with that. Like stuff with guitars and stuff like that happened in like pubs and stuff like that, and like maybe like for pop music and stuff like that, we didn't really. I mean, in the maybe early on, like like there would be some synth rock like Gary Newman or like like Human League, this kind of thing was into, but like full on guitar, like just didn't happen.
You didn't like it.
It was just too. It was somewhere else. It wasn't something that like football or I didn't do all that stuff. You know what I mean? It was like electronic music. I mean, I'd prefer to listen to like Vangelis or Jean-Michel Jarre or stuff like that. Like stuff that was kind of for me was a bit more musically challenging, because it was stuff that I would listen to and I could break it down. You know what I mean? Like breaking down like a distortion on a guitar. You know what I mean? There was nothing for me to contemplate, to tell you the truth. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a bit of a melody or whatever, but like sorry. Anyway, going on again.
So, yeah, no, man. And before other speakers before mentioned things about futurisms and consciousness versus futurism, and slackness versus sort of maybe conscious stuff. I've got a feeling that we mentioned here, when you were coming up, we mentioned the new technologies, the new synthesizers, the new drum machines, all that, mixing it up with your idea of, as you said, making funk musical machines and adding a bit of Dune and science fiction into that, and you come up with black secret technology. It's kind of, I get the feeling, let me know if you agree, that it's kind of like the same way, very similar way, in the way that grime came about, for instance. And not just grime, I'm not just, it's young people always like,
sure.
grabbing
Pushing,
onto...
the rawest thing that was happening. I mean, at the time, in them early days, technology did like influence like what was going on. I mean, like the S950 sampler, having that, and the Atari 1040, the Atari ST 1040, like having them two machines definitely shaped the way that jungle happened. You know, like because it meant that you could sequence things in a certain way, like and later on with before the S1000 came out, there was no time stretching. So like we basically had this loop thing. So like if you could tell, as soon as the S1000 came out, we got all the time stretching tracks. Before that, it was all this different type of track. Time stretching basically is a way of taking a sample and cycling it so it becomes longer without pitching it down like on a record or something. But basically you could do from one machine to another, like the entire genre changed. Like so, like in that way, basically, yeah. With music in on them levels, you know what I mean. People, yeah, they changed with what was going on. You know, the music had a lot to do with. I mean, like with the grime thing, I never, because I think I was living in America when that started to happen, so I couldn't really tell you so much about it. I just remember it being an English form of like hip hop, kind of. Am I right? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, but you know, obviously, grime sort of comes from that sort of lineage of UK bass music, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
But it's very interesting what you're saying about time stretching. I think, you know, obviously people always talk about that when they talk about jungle, because actually changes the concept of time, literally.
Yeah.
So
anyway, did you get your signal from there?
Sorry.
I thought we ran out of time.
Have we run out of time, or are
talking about time?
We have run out of time.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Do we have a time for any questions or not? So I think we've run out of time. Thank you very much for listening. And a big up to Guy Called Gerald. Give it up.